Yeah. Do you find that resolve being tested more? Like now that you're in the public eye, do you ever find a temptation to be like, man, it'd be so much easier to just toe the line instead of, being the guy making these stances?
Well, I have sporadic fantasies about stepping out of this public role, but it isn't realistic. There isn't any pathway there. And I also don't want to. Like I'm exhausted by this, and my health has been quite bad, especially in December. I think I almost died in December.
Jesus.
And it was partly related to all of this, but there were other factors. But
the stress factors that entered your life because of this.
Well, that played a role, but a bunch of things came together at the same time. But no, I don't regret it at all, and it's a crazy adventure, and I have no idea what's going to happen next. That's also something that's I have no idea what's going to happen when I wake up. And
so,
except I'll go sort out my room a little bit. I know I'm going to do that.
You're in the public now, right? So you put yourself in a position where a lot more people have an opinion on you. How's that been for your mental health? Are you completely unimpacted by it, or?
Well, mostly it's been terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to say that I'm not particularly tempted by the temptations of fame, but I do think in some sense, there's some sense in which that's true. So, for example, it's partly because I'm older, eh? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not interested in erotic attention from women other than my wife. I actually find it unsettling, let's say, primarily. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there are people that have stars in their eyes, and I'm a clinical psychologist too, and pretty aware of that sort of thing, and I can see it right away, and I'm not happy about it. Like it doesn't make me feel elevated or anything like that.
Sycophants don't interest you.
Well, it's yeah. I mean, I wouldn't even say that they're sycophants exactly. It's that what they're seeing isn't. They're seeing something that they're projecting. They're not seeing me, and but mostly, I think of it as a real opportunity, because I am extraordinarily interested in helping people, I mean, and I don't mean that in, what I mean is I'm interested in making men into productive monsters. That would be a wonderful thing, and I mean, I like teaching. I've always loved teaching, and I see my role as an educator in the development of souls and citizens, in a serious manner. And I want to see people go out there and grapple with the damn world, because there's real problems to be solved.
But that's what you're doing with your platform. Is your platform doing anything to you?
Confusing me. Mm-hmm. It isn't obvious. It isn't obvious to me at all what to make of all this. I don't know who I am. Mm-hmm. I have no idea who I am. I know who I was, but I don't know who I am, and I don't know where I'm going.
Well, we perceive you, or at least I perceive you, as a bit of a modern day Socrates in a lot of ways. They're giving you this plenty of options to just shh. Hey, we don't want you to leave or anything. We value you. Just stop saying those things you want to say, and you can stick around. And you've listened to that voice inside. You've talked to him, and he says, no, you need to stay here. This is a rock worth standing on. That's how I perceive you. And the fact that you're so eloquent and so verbose, and you really, it's not that you hit on the issues that are at play and that you try to find solutions to them. You boil it down to the root causes, and sometimes those root causes go back to our foundations of early man. The reasons why these genders are the way they are, the way men act this way and women act this way. Like it's not. That's why when the trans stuff comes up, it's like, oh man, they don't know anything about their own gender. They don't know anything about one gender, much less 13. it's very frustrating. And so I'm glad that you're out there, and I've been absorbing as much of your content as I can over the last few weeks, taking a stand for common sense, if nothing else.
Yeah, that's the vibe a lot of people get from it, I bet, is just watching those lectures and feeling like, these are thoughts that I feel like I've had, but I've never had articulated to me.
That's exactly it. Like, you put your finger on it right there. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have told me that. And it's true. The thing about talking about archetypal realities is that whenever you talk about an archetypal reality, you're talking to someone about the patterns of their soul. And it's a Platonic idea that all learning is remembering. And there's truth in that. There's truth in that because you have a nature. You're a human being. You're not an ant or an armadillo or an aardvark or a platypus, even though you're probably as peculiar as all of those things. But you're a human being. You have a nature, and you have to be reminded of that nature as you grow. That's what enculturation is, to be reminded of your nature. And so when I talk to people about archetypal realities, I can see the lights go on in the crowd. It's so fun, because people have a facial expression that manifests itself unconsciously when the light goes on. So I say something, and I know that's like there's this idea of a supersaturated solution. So here's how you make one. So you boil some water and you pour sugar in it, and you keep pouring sugar in it until the boiling water can't take any more sugar, right? So, and then what you do is you cool it very carefully and without jarring it. And if you're careful, you can cool it down so that the water now contains more dissolved sugar than you could dissolve in sugar at that temperature. It's like the water doesn't notice that it has too much sugar in it. And then if you drop in one crystal, it'll all crystallize. That's a supersaturated solution, and that's what people are like. And this archetypal information is like the seed crystal. I say, look, you have a lot of fragmentary knowledge. Here's a little overarching structure that will tie all of that together. You go, wow, that's a revelation, right? And any archetypal story contains with it a revelation. And so people tell me all the time, you're telling me things that I already knew, but I haven't heard it put that way. I didn't know how to say that. It's like, yeah, exactly. That's the articulation of archetypal truth. It's already built.
Did you get to these truths through introspection or through study of philosophy? Like, does this come from reading a whole bunch of Nietzsche? Like, how do you think that you are the one who has found this thing? And you have, not to toot your horn too much, but you have, because I feel it when I listen to you speak. You have found that thing that connects all of the feelings that were just like bare wires sticking up, and it was like someone had ripped the top part of the mechanism off, and when they all connect and you start understanding why you feel the things you feel when you feel them, then man, you can really become a better person, better man, better whatever.
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, I tried to tackle a very serious problem when I was a young person, when I was about 25, because what I wanted to figure out was whether or not the war between the Soviet Union and the West was just a matter of opinion. It's a postmodern question in some sense. Was it just two equally valid worldviews, or equally invalid, depending on how you look at it, competing, or was there something more at stake? So that's the first thing I wanted to figure out. And I spent when I wrote my first book, Maps of Meaning, I wrote that for 15 years, and I wrote 3 hours a day, every day. And I was absolutely obsessed by it. I was thinking about it 16 hours a day. I had to lift weights to stop thinking. My thoughts were just constantly racing. And I read a tremendous amount and very widely. A lot of biology, a lot of anthropology, a lot of primatology, neurobiology, psychopharmacology, heavy on the biological end. And I read everything by Carl Jung. I read everything that Nietzsche wrote that was published at that point, and a variety of other thinkers who were very influential. And I was trying to weave all that together, in the context of this, what was the most important story of the 20th century, because that was the conflict between communism and the West, I think. And I guess that I have this capacity to see patterns in things, and I was very influenced by Carl Jung, who was an amazing genius, and many of the ideas that I put forward are developments of his ideas, I would say, and the same with Nietzsche and Dostoevsky. And so I was also fortunate to have had these geniuses, absolute geniuses, profound prophetic geniuses as mentors. And I read the damn books and I understood them, you know, like that's the thing. I really read them and I mean, there are things in Jung that exceed my comprehension because he was so unbelievably well-read and erudite and profound. But I got a lot of Nietzsche. I understood a lot of Nietzsche, and I understood a lot of the biology that I was reading. And so there just aren't that many people who have the biological and symbolic knowledge at the same time.
It frustrates me a bit that you struggled a bit reading that, because I'm wondering who that literature is for then. Because I've seen you discuss your IQ and how high it is, especially on the verbal side. Like that's your bread and butter, and yet you're like, well, I understood most of it. Who's he writing for?
Yeah,
future man who will be able to finally.
Yeah. That certainly. I mean, Nietzsche wrote for future man. There's no doubt about it. Some people do that, and I mean, Jung was writing to figure things out. You know, like when I wrote Maps of Meaning, I wasn't writing for an audience. I mean, it isn't because I didn't care about the audience. It's because the reason I was writing was to figure something out. The book was a byproduct of figuring something out. This next book I'm writing, which is due January, or will be out in January, it's called 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. It's written much more explicitly with an audience in mind. You know, there's more communicative intent. But so I think with Jung, a lot of what he was trying to do was to figure things out. And you do that by writing. It's a great way of thinking. Like if you have a problem, the first thing you should do is write down what the problem is. Then you should write down what you think the answers might be. Then you should refine it. I mean, that's the purpose. It's amazing what we don't teach students in university. Like I have to teach my students that that's the purpose of an essay. Okay, here's the purpose of an essay. It's quite straightforward. First of all, pick a question you care about. So that's the first thing, is like, pick a question that you actually want to know the answer to. Okay, now what do you do? Well, go read a bunch about it to see what you can find out. Then see if you can answer it. Why? Well, because if it's an important question and you know the answer to it, then you've added a bunch of arrows to your quiver. You've decreased the probability you're going to run headlong into a sharp object. You've sharpened yourself and articulated yourself and made yourself into a more powerful problem-solving entity. And that's how I try to teach my students that writing is a sacred act. It's you create yourself by writing. Now, thinking and talking, the same, but writing in particular is a very intense exercise, and you're articulating yourself into being by writing. And students should just know that. Because I have students, they'll tell me, and some of my daughter's friends have said this. My daughter even said this at one point. Well, we just write what we think the professor wants to hear. It's like, you do not do that. You are polluting and corrupting your soul when you do that, because when you write something, you come to believe it. And there's experimental evidence on that. It's absolutely crystal clear. Like let's say you have a right-wing idea about some political topic, okay? And I bring you into the lab and I measure your attitude towards that topic. And then I get you to write a 500-word essay on the other side of the argument. Then I bring you back in 2 weeks and test your conceptions. You'll have shifted way to the left. So if you write, and it's the same when you speak, if you write what you know to be untrue, you will come to believe what you have stated that's untrue. And it's the same when you speak. And then you'll be full of untruth. And it's like, how can that be useful?
I only partially agree, right? Like, so I like the way that you're saying, hey, this pollutes your mind. This is where you are, etc. Like, I'm on board there.
Yep.
And maybe I'm a bad person or a bad parent for this, but I've also taught my kids that, sometimes life lines up certain obstacles. And if you can go around them instead of through them, that's not the worst thing in the world. If you can find a way to succeed in this world, that's not the hardest way to get through it. This is a fun one. She's graduated National Honor Society, right? For some reason, her high school decided to make National Honor Society very difficult, and they needed, I think, 100 hours of volunteer time twice a year or something like that. It was something outrageous. And I was like, we have to find a way not to volunteer that freaking much. She's a captain of her speech and debate team. She's the lead in the high school play. She doesn't have time to do that much volunteer time. So, we volunteered our way around it. And I'm not embarrassed about that at all. You know,
No,
like
I did the same thing.
Look, couple of things about that. The first is,
if
there's
the
no
best way to
utility-
succeed is to tell your professor what he needs to hear, that might be how you succeed.
I like your first example, but I'm not fond of the second one.
Me too.
And the reason for that is that means that the institution has become corrupt, if you have to do that. And because that institution is specifically there to train the Logos faculty, it's a particularly egregious form of misconduct to allow that corruption to manifest itself. I wouldn't take issue with what you said about the practicalities of life. I don't think you should make unnecessary enemies. And you can't, you have to pick your battles, right? And you have to help your children pick their battles. And so, we could take apart what you said and do a detailed analysis of it, but at first glance, there isn't anything about it that strikes me as sketchy, let's say.
We live in the world we have, not the world we want, right? So if she's going to a corrupt university, I would struggle not to advise her to succeed, in that.
Well, one thing I can tell you though, and this is actually optimistic news, is that when I have convinced students to write what they think instead of what they think the professor wants to hear, it is almost always the case that they're rewarded with a good grade. Mm-hmm. You have to be a pretty damn corrupt professor to give a student a bad grade when they write a good essay that you disagree with. And I would say that even in the more corrupt disciplines, and there are plenty of them, I think that kind of outright fraudulent behavior is still pretty rare. So that's
so then it doesn't fit what I'm saying, right? You don't have to write what the professor wants to hear to succeed in that environment, right? I would just taking what you said and sort of expanding it to the rest of life.
Yeah, well, it's particularly dangerous with what you write and say, though, because you are... See, the thing is, when you generate a new thought, you generate the neurological structure that gave rise to the thought, and it has a degree of permanency. And so if you generate a lot of thoughts that you don't abide by, let's say, or agree with, you're actually building mechanisms in your mind, physiological mechanisms that work at counter purposes to you. And there's real danger in that. Like I see this with university professors. Let me give you an example. I mean, your argument is don't be rash. And that's a good argument. Like it really is. Or fine, wasteful. Sure. Don't waste your time on futile battles. That's another one. Yes. But so here's an example. So, I've had postdocs or graduate students come up to me and say, look, I really can't say what I have to say in my classes, but I feel that after I get this accreditation, I'll be able to say what I have to say. But then they graduate from graduate school, and then they do a postdoc, and they say, well, my career is still in the formation period. I can't afford to be controversial. It's like, okay. Then they become an assistant professor, and they say, well, once I get tenure. Then they get tenure, and they think, well, I still have to make the cutoff to full professor. So maybe you make that when you're about 32 or 33. Then I'm going to do what I have to do and say what I have to say. It's like, no, you're not, because you've trained yourself for 15 years to shut the hell up and toe the party line. And there isn't anything left of you by that point. And that's what happens often. So that's the counter position. So don't be rash, yeah, but don't sell your soul. That's the other one.
Yeah.